party system. No, I must place the unions in proper pathway for them to understand.
Hello and welcome to the program. Nigeria now has a budget. 5 months after the president, of course, submitted that document to the National Assembly. That's parliament in this country. Remember, the president actually submitted the budget December last year, and the lawmakers have actually taken 5 months now to work on the budget, and now we have a budget. But then there's a difference in the figure the president actually presented and what we have now. The lawmakers on their own have increased the budget by about 143 billion. So what we have now as the budget of Nigeria for 2017, even though it has not been signed into law by the acting president or the president, what we have is 7.44 trillion naira, of course higher than the figure we got last year. But let's look at some of the statistics now, or some of the figures in that budget. And there you have the total budget spending, what Nigeria is actually proposing to spend, 7.44 trillion naira, higher than what we got last year. And the capital expenditure, 2.18 trillion naira, that's 30% of the budget. So the government is hoping to spending more or continue its spending on infrastructure. Government has been spending heavily on infrastructure, hoping that that way it will be able to get the country out of recession. Now, recurrent expenditure is 2.98 trillion naira. Recurrent expenditure very high, of course. Salaries have to be paid and what have you. But it's good that we're spending this much on capital projects, as a matter of fact. Now, let's look at some highlights now from the budget. Highlights now that some people have actually considered disturbing. Debt servicing, domestic debt servicing alone, what we would be spending is servicing the debts we have actually collected domestically, 1.48 trillion naira. And then for the foreign debt is 75.8 billion. This is actually billion and not million now. So we will be spending 175.8 billion naira. And on statutory transfer, of course, 400 and statutory transfer is 434.4 billion naira. And look at the budget deficit, 2.36 trillion naira, and that's actually 2.18% to the GDP. We're talking about the budget deficit now to the GDP ratio. Quite low, some people would say, but then when you consider the debt servicing to revenue ratio, then it is disturbing. So it means Nigeria would have to borrow 2.36 trillion naira to fund the budget, because the total money we are expecting to get in terms of revenue would just not be able to fund the 7.44 trillion naira budget. So the budget deficit quite high when you consider the revenue we're making. When you consider the fact, too, that Nigeria is currently servicing debts now dating back to several years. Last year, for instance, budget deficit high, and we've continued that way. But the government has justified that, saying that Nigeria needs to borrow to fund its infrastructure project, and that the only way we can get out of recession is actually to spend, borrow to spend on infrastructure. Now, look at the revenue breakdown there. There you have an idea of where the money will be coming from. As usual, the bulk of the revenue we're expecting will be coming from oil, 1.985 trillion naira. And non-oil revenue, 1.37 trillion naira. Now, Nigeria is currently struggling to make sure that what we earn from non-oil revenue is actually huge, if not better than what we would be earning from oil. But then is a problem. This is not too bad. Then from federal government independent revenue, we're expecting 807.5 billion. And then the recovered loot. I mean, those cases are still subject of litigation. They are still in court, but the government is hoping that from the recovered loot, even the ones that are going to be coming from abroad, the Abacha loot and what have you, and those that will be collected now or that have been seized from, well, corrupt Nigerians, 565.1 billion naira. And then you have other revenue sources like tax, mining, ports, and what have you, 210.9 billion. Now, when you do the calculation here, I mean, you'll just discover the total revenue we're expecting is actually not up to the 7.44 trillion naira that has been budgeted. And that is the reason why we need to borrow to make up for what we want to spend. Now, who collects what? The top allocation, of course, Power Housing and Works, because the government intends to continue its huge spending now on infrastructure. So Power Housing and Works getting the lion's share. You have transportation there getting 241.7 billion. Special intervention 150 billion. And then defense spending this year will be 140 billion. Look at industry, trade and investment, 81.7 billion. I mean, this lineup clearly shows that Nigeria intends to continue to spend heavily now on infrastructure, hoping that that will get the country out of recession by the end of this year. Interior will get that. Now, NDDC, very important. It's going up 64.0 billion naira. And then you have the Niger Delta, 34 billion. Actually, what is going into the amnesty program this year has been increased. We have somewhere around 65 billion naira going into the amnesty program. Now, Nigeria needs to do that to continue to maintain peace in the Niger Delta so that it will be able to meet the budget oil production benchmark now of 2.2 million barrels per day. Now, there you have the benchmarks. Oil price, the benchmark price is $44.5 dollars per barrel. That's actually close to the prevailing market rate of oil at the moment. Oil is currently trading for around $50 per barrel. Some people actually have issues with that figure, saying it's a bit too optimistic. You never can tell. Who knows whether if the price of oil actually comes down, what happens? But then the projection is that the price of oil will either remain at 50 or continue to go up. Let's hope it remains that way. Oil production, of course, as I said, we're targeting 2.2 million barrels of oil per day. Very important to achieve this figure if we hope to fund the budget, and that the government revenue does not suffer any shortfall at all, as we had last year, where oil production actually came down to around 1.2 million barrels per day as a result of the bombings by militant groups like Niger Delta Avengers, actually. Then the exchange rate, 305 naira to the dollar. Of course, the prevailing exchange rate in the black market is far higher than that. Inflation, we're targeting inflation rate of 12.92%. At the moment, inflation is slightly over 17%, I think 17.24%. So whether this is achievable, we just have to wait and see. And we're also targeting a growth rate of 2.5%. Now, is that achievable? Some people have said it's achievable. The government believes it's achievable. We just have to wait and see. But everything is dependent on whether we're able to get the money to come in as quickly as possible so that we're able to spend them as quickly as possible. Now, we'll be taking a short break now. When we come back, I'll have some analysts actually come in to further crunch these numbers now to give you a sense of what we should be looking at as far as the 2017 budget goes. And we'll also be talking about this, the number, the amount, the budget of the various states of the country. Imagine what difference, the budget of the various states of this country, 36 of them, would be making if the state governments actually followed those budgets now or they implement the budgets now to the letter. Stay with us and don't go away. Every day, every hour, and every minute, news break in Nigeria. Things happen so fast, it's most times difficult to track and comprehend them. But that's what we do right here on DEJI360. 2015, would you want to come back again?
It's like asking Jesus Christ if he knew he was going to die, will you want to come back as the savior of the world again?
We do not just help you track the stories, we break them down, explore all the angles, analyze the issues so that you can fully comprehend the stories and use them to make the right decisions.